Hi, I'm Gavin Carlson, and this is Out of Bounds, Daily Bruin Sports Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Out of Bounds, the official sports podcast of the Daily Bruin. As always, I'm your host, Gavin Carlson, a fourth-year sports staff writer here at the Daily Bruin, and today we've got a real fun trio, in my humble opinion. Fresh off her trip to Hawaii to cover the most recent men's basketball games for UCLA, senior sports staff writer, fourth year, Lauryn Wang. How you doing?
I'm awesome, Gavin. How about you?
I'm good. Good Thanksgiving break?
Yep. How about you?
Good. We are here on a Monday after Thanksgiving, of course, but before we talk about, no, we're not going to talk about sides today. We're going to talk about basketball with Jack Nelson, senior sports staff writer, fourth year. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great, Gavin. I got to shout you out for the fantastic Hawaiian shirt you're rocking today. Very fitting for the men's basketball podcast after their Maui Invitational.
Yes, he beat me to it. I am repping some Hawaiian floral patterns, you could say, in honor of the most recent tournament for UCLA men's basketball. Let's jump right into it. Kind of an interesting, this is going to be an interesting podcast because obviously the two games that everybody wanted to see UCLA win, everybody being the fans, of course, they did not. Handled business against a lesser opponent. But despite two losses, you could argue two encouraging losses, two losses that might have the fan base, excited about what's to come. Let's jump right into it, starting with the game against Marquette, who went on to beat Kansas later in this tournament. I mean, a phenomenal basketball game, right down to the wire. Sebastian Mack just coming up short on that game-tying attempt. But we'll start with Lauryn, who wrote all three fantastic raps. What did you think of that performance from UCLA against a really good Marquette team?
Yeah, I honestly think it was encouraging. Something to note definitely was Burke in his UCLA debut.
Absolutely.
Definitely looked a little rusty, but that's to be expected considering, he hasn't played competitively in probably months for now, as of now. So I think his debut and then the way he was kind of in the starting lineup could give UCLA fans something to look forward to in the future with him just becoming more comfortable and acclimating to the American college basketball game. Definitely an exciting matchup, though. That was really fun to cover. Yeah,
I mean, like you said, Burke, we didn't know coming into the tournament if he would be active. Of course, they announced it, I think, right before, like the day before the game. And like you said, it wasn't the greatest showing from him, but really encouraging and interesting to see Mick trust him so much right away in such a big game against such a strong opponent. To have him play 27 minutes despite going 0 of 7 from the field, despite having 0 of 2 from 3, for him to be out there for most of the game despite all that shows that Mick really trusts Burke and will want to see a lot from him throughout the year. One thing that stood out to me was Adai, the lack of Adai Mara in that game. Just 6 minutes, just one shot attempt. And it seems like the same way Mick trusts Burke already, he does not trust Adai against elite opponents. Is that fair to say, Jack?
I would definitely say so. I think Mick talked about it a little bit before their first game against Marquette. He talked about how Burke, just him being the oldest freshman, they tried to recruit him last year. They weren't able to get him to the team. And so they finally were able to get him to the team this year. And even then, the NCAA just took so long to actually grant him, eligibility. So it's definitely big for them to finally have him. But with Adai, he's definitely a bit of a young unicorn, you could say. He's kind of got that kind of build, very obviously a very lanky guy. He's got a lot of skill, but still a lot to be desired on the defensive side of the ball, I think. I think we need to see a lot more from his shot block on the perimeter. That's certainly something Mick has talked about already this season. Just in general with all these UCLA players, the defense has been certainly impressive with all these young guys from the get-go, but also a lot of the perimeter defense, I think, has definitely been leaving something to be desired in that side of the game.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to defense a little bit when we talk about the Gonzaga game and the massive scoring performance they gave up. But just going back to Adai a little bit, I was surprised just because in the game against Long Island before this tournament, he was phenomenal. I was at that game with Joseph, and 24 minutes, he had 14 points, 4 blocks, I think 4 rebounds, and was really efficient. So I was really I wanted to see if Mick would trust him even against an opponent that he might not be ready for. So obviously he doesn't, and that's something that's interesting to look out for. I think the main storyline in this game or thing that we noticed was Sebastian Mack. Really already has the keys to the offense, it feels like. I think a lot of people anticipated Dylan Andrews being the one leading the show for this team, with good complementary pieces all over the floor, with Lazar shooting a bunch of jump shots and a lot of inside presence with the Adai and Burke and whatnot. But for it to be the Sebastian Mack show already, what'd you think of that being there? I'm sure it felt like he was just kind of running the team in that opening game.
Yeah, he's a really effective signal caller, I think, and his court vision is very impressive. And what I was seeing was Sebastian at the 1 or Dylan Andrews at the 1, kind of running this high screen from a Dembona, or sometimes
Will McClendon, which I think that's what they ran on the last play, which was a little interesting. But you're right, a lot of high pick and roll.
Yeah, and that looked effective, at least against Marquette. I also saw some really good inbound plays where they were getting open on the corner and the baseline, and that proved really effective for UCLA. But it's just, him coming into UCLA as a freshman, I don't think any of us expected this elite performance so early on in the season. It's promising. Yeah.
I will say, I think we've seen a lot of, it's kind of like shades of Dylan Andrews from last year for Sebastian Mack. I think he's got a similar kind of player where he's driving to the hoop just so aggressively and trying to get his shot off no matter what. I think definitely he's going to find a way to learn how to, really use assists to his advantage and really dish the ball out more to his other players and really spread out the offense a little bit more, because it seems like he's trying to do everything himself, playing a lot of hero ball sometimes in these games. And there was that one shot where he goes and then he gets fouled, tosses the ball up, and it somehow falls in the hoop. So that was pretty crazy to watch. But anyway, just a very, very aggressive style of play from Sebastian Mack that's been paying off pretty well for him. So far.
Absolutely.
Confidence.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's it's kind of like, what's going to happen when he gets the ball. He's going to somehow get past his first defender and get into the paint. And I think, unfortunately for UCLA right now, you also know he's probably not going to dish the ball off, like you were saying. He's probably going to go up and take a challenging shot. It was working for the most part against Marquette, 25 points, 6 of 14 from the field, but 13 of 13 from the free throw line. That just, for a guard, that just proves how much you're getting to the basket to take 13 free throws. Only 2 assists to 3 turnovers. And then, Dylan Andrews somehow already with 4. I think that's the main thing. Like you said, it's going to be the passing. Sebastian Mack, if he's going to be the leader of this offense, which it feels like he already is, he's going to have to get better distributing the ball, because we're so used in Westwood to Tiger Campbell for the longest time being a pass-first guard, getting it to his perimeter players. And maybe UCLA doesn't have those types of perimeter players right now, but Sebastian Mack's going to have to get people involved if UCLA wants to sort of take that next step. I don't think we really need to talk too much about the second game of the Maui Invitational against Chaminade. Is that the right pronunciation?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, Chaminade. Nice and fancy. But obviously a huge win there. I think we saw more of the same in terms of Sebastian Mack being aggressive. We saw, I think, a better Dylan Andrews, but the competition, not there.
I think one thing definitely worth mentioning is that in this tournament especially, we saw UCLA give up a lot of big runs. We saw this in the Chaminade. The only really notable thing I saw from the Chaminade game is going into the beginning of the second half, I believe it was. We gave up, I don't know exactly what the run was, something in the magnitude of like 15, around there. But it was, and that was something that happened in the Marquette game as well. I think it was a 17-0 run in that game that UCLA gave up, which really hurt them. You think about going back to that, even if they just scored a couple baskets in that game, we could be looking at a UCLA win against Marquette in the first game of this Invitational, right? So I think the only note from Chaminade really is that the UCLA team is definitely prone to giving up big offensive spurts against these opponents.
Yeah, definitely the runs. I think a lot of that is just being a young team, a lot of inexperience, like you're saying. And I do think that it does come down to having a point guard that can sort of slow things down when things are not going well and get people reorganized and calm. And I think it's fair to say UCLA doesn't have that right now. Dylan Andrews was more impressive, like I said, in the second game. A lot of assists, 6 assists, still 3 turnovers is too many, especially against that team. But I think he's going to grow, and I think he's going to realize that he doesn't need to score a lot with Sebastian doing what Sebastian's doing with all the other weapons. And we might see a little bit more facilitating than we might have expected coming into the year from Dylan Andrews. But now we have to talk about Gonzaga. I think the game that UCLA fans wanted the Bruins to win the most. And once again, they came just short because once again of another superstar performance from a Gonzaga player. Mick was not happy after this Gonzaga game after giving up a 30-point scoring performance. Just what were your thoughts kind of being in that game? I'm sure the environment was phenomenal, but what did you see from UCLA in that one?
I saw some early frustration from both Mick Cronin and the players. I think it was definitely noticeable in that environment and getting to sit right near the UCLA bench this time because they were home in this game finally. And then just the atmosphere with a lot of Gonzaga fans, a lot of UCLA fans on opposite ends of the same sort of side of the arena. I think it felt like the most high pressure situation a lot of these freshmen and newcomers, inexperienced players had ever been in. And so you see this sort of like franticness, I think, early on that settled down going into the second half, which was a good sign for Mick Cronin's squad. But that's sort of how I would characterize those opening minutes, I would say.
Yeah. I think it's surprising. I did not expect the game to go this way, just in the sense that you feel like if UCLA at this stage is in close games, it'll be because Mick Cronin's brand, DNA, great defense, keeping games low scoring, keeping them close, not letting anyone go off. And we did not have that. Watson with 32 points, 14 of 15 is absurd. Yeah. Absurd. So for him to do that and for UCLA to still be, right there is impressive. To be honest, it's because no one else on Gonzaga really did anything else. Nembhard was 3 of 12. But what do you think going forward, this type of game, Jack? I know how much UCLA wanted to win this game. I know how much UCLA wanted to win one of the two games against one of these elite teams. But is it fair to say that what you saw in this Gonzaga game and what you saw overall is enough to be encouraged going forward despite 2 losses?
Without a question, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you lose by 2 to a Marquette team that, as you said, beat the number 1 seed in this tournament, the number 1 team in the country, Kansas. And then you lose to a really good Gonzaga team, which, of course, every year is somewhere around the top 10, top 15. These are 2 quality opponents that UCLA had was in like good range of actually beating these 2 teams.
Absolutely.
And recall how unprepared this team seemed going into this tournament against, with some really sketchy wins against especially Long Island going into this game, where this team looks like it could get really blown out by Marquette and Gonzaga, and completely different narrative played out. One note I will say about the Gonzaga game, just watching from my perspective, just the amount of fouls called in that game was insane. I think the tournament as a whole, there was some pretty crazy foul stats. In the Gonzaga game, it was over 50 was the total amount of fouls called. I mean, I don't know. I'm never one to really criticize the officials that much, but it seemed like they really hurt the ability of this game to actually be a really entertaining and consistent kind of game going forward.
And I think it stole the opportunity to learn more about UCLA, which at least me personally, that's what I'm worried about right now is learning about this team is in these preseason games. No one's expecting this team to be ranked in the top 10 going into March Madness. So this, a game like this, maybe some people are worried about being in the AP poll right now. I don't think Mick Cronin's worried about that. I think it's about getting this team where they need to be, and you didn't really get to learn a lot about the team because of all the fouls. Nonetheless, it was, I think, overall, we learned a lot about this team in this tournament. And like you were saying, with it being a frantic environment, with it being a hostile environment, seems like UCLA is always kind of outnumbered fans-wise when it comes to these road events, especially a fan base like Gonzaga travels really well. So I know the atmosphere was definitely pro-Gonzaga, and for UCLA to do what they did is impressive nonetheless. Any closing thoughts? I mean, it's kind of just a quick recap of this tournament. I mean, going forward, I think, like you're saying, it's definitely enough to be encouraged with this team. They play UC Riverside on Thursday, expecting a big win there. Villanova will be very interesting in the first/second week of December. I think that stretch against Villanova and Ohio State will teach you a lot about this team, and if they've kind of grown from this first experience against tough opponents. Is that fair to say?
Definitely, and I think I'm excited to see how Mick Cronin utilizes Elaine Fibleau. A little bit more going forward. I think what we saw was really promising with him in this in these past 3 games.
Yeah, a lot of new faces, a lot of stuff to incorporate, and I think the UC Riverside game will be a nice break in terms of playing elite competition, way to get the rotation and kind of get everyone involved. Because I do think now after this showing, you want to see UCLA win one, if not both of those games against Villanova and Ohio State. Maybe that's a crazy thing to say, but it feels like they kind of have exceeded expectations thus far in the season, and now it's time to actually turn that into a couple wins. But yeah, I think that's all for this episode of the Out of Bounds podcast. Thank you so much, not Grace. Oh my goodness, Lauryn and Jack. Lauryn and Jack.
You're not going to hear at the end of that one, Gavin.
You're right. It's hard. All right, it's hard. Shout out to our amazing video crew as always. I'm not going to call any of them Grace. Don't worry. But yes, it was a fun episode. UCLA had an interesting showing, and I think there's a lot to come with this team. So that'll do it. As always, UCLA Daily Bruin on YouTube. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share. Help us out. We're working hard here. We want everyone, as many people as possible, in the UCLA community to watch and listen to this podcast. But yes, UCLA Daily Bruin on YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, everywhere you can listen to podcasts. And that'll do it. UCLA men's basketball, UC Riverside coming up. Thanks so much for watching, and so long.